Hello, everyone. That was a great morning session. So glad to have you with us. I'm Stephanie Pitts-Noggle. I am the Economic Development Specialist at Longmont Economic Development Partnership. I'm going to be with you now for the rest of the afternoon. We've got three great events. We've got different speakers, but our first speaker this afternoon is Valerie Eastman. Valerie is going to be talking to us about how to decide what kind of funding is right for your startup. Valerie is the founder and CEO of WinterWinds Robotics. So I'm going to just hand it right over to Valerie to give us a little insight on this very, very important and complicated topic.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. It's great to be here again with everybody here in Longmont and our friends along the Front Range. I hope that you guys have had an amazing and meaningful week, just like I have. Founders and entrepreneurs are exhausted. We have so many decisions to make. I really hope that this week has just been as meaningful to you as it has been to me. I've learned so much. We've learned that we need to reset and reprioritize, reimagine. We need to just think completely differently than we did before to get anywhere, to get to the next level in our businesses. No matter what kind of business it is that we run with our business partners, everything's different now. And I think in some ways that's good. Others have spoken to how the pandemic helped them reevaluate their priorities. And so I think the timing has never been better to have a new take on some of the considerations, some of the brass tacks that we have to deal with as business owners. And that includes things like funding. But we can't do any of that to our best ability until we are reset, until we see this as a new opportunity rather than a new burden. We've got news that says that the Delta variant's not going away. Our kids can't get vaccinated yet. We're dealing with some realities. So I think that it's a good time. It's a good time to maybe take some revolutionary and different approaches to everything that we do. So I am going to start sharing my screen here in a second, and I'll pull this up for you guys. Okay. Let me go back here. Well, it's doing what it's doing, so we will do it live like we do in Longmont. That's how it goes here. So a little bit about me. My name is Valerie Eastman. My friends and closest coworkers call me V. That is my preferred name, but I do answer to Valerie, especially in business. So I'm a former teacher. And people laugh sometimes when they hear that. They're, how in the heck would a teacher ever be a CEO of a robotics startup? And that's a whole other conversation, but it actually scales so beautifully, and I have never felt more sense of belonging, even in the difficulty, having come from an education background. I actually got into building robots before I even started WinterWinds because someone told me that I was incapable of doing so. And so being the stubborn business builder that I am in other industries, I started building robots. Then I started selling robots and services, having then become interested in artificial intelligence. A little bit about WinterWinds. We were founded in February of 2018. Again, I got interested in artificial intelligence and robotics, particularly as it pertains to how educational approaches can be applied to AI and robotics. It ended up that research that I participated in led to a NASA SBIR for the quote-unquote brain portion of our technology. And that technology will be merged with a piece of hardware that we're calling the Earthling AMR platform together with the artificial intelligence. I am proud that we are majority woman-owned. We are 50% women-staffed, and we have two arms of our business. So the first arm is high-context services and consulting for startups, small and medium businesses, and Fortune 500s. And then kind of calling back to the NASA SBIR stuff that we've done and The Earthling AMR platform, we also have an internal suite of products that are very research and development heavy. So before we go into the common types of funding, I kind of want to make some clarifications. I also want to clarify my target audience right now. If you're an expert on funding, I am super happy for you. You may not like everything that I have to say. I am taking this from the perspective that I had when I was just starting out, and I am trying to reach people who are just starting out. So there's two reasons for that. One is I remember how it felt to feel in over my head, because prior to this, I had only lived in kind of the bootstrapped business world across several sectors. This is not my first time owning a business by any means, but I've always come from kind of a cash flow background. And because we have two other presentations today that you are going to definitely want to tune in for, that delve more deeply into the types of funding available. And I wanted to have this be kind of a precursor to those conversations. So make sure that you tune in for the 1 o'clock and the 2 o'clock sessions. Those are going to be extremely helpful to you. And again, some more clarification. For dilutive funding, just for the sake of being good stewards of time and making sure that other people can start their presentations on time. For dilutive funding, knowing that there are all sorts of different types, I am mostly going to be referring to angel investment and venture capital. That seems to be the most popular type of dilutive funding that is sought these days in the startup ecosystem, especially out here. And for the sake of being good stewards of time for non-dilutive funding, I will mostly be referring to savings, government grants, and loans. Those are just the most common ones that I talk about with my customers. Those are the most common ones that I hear about, the most common ones that I have always dealt with. I'm going to try to avoid as much jargon as possible, because I remember what it's like to have not been in that world and to not know what the terminology was. If you are someone who's just starting out or who's nervous and has this awesome idea and does not know where to start, if you are feeling lost and discouraged and you don't know for sure if you can do it, you are my audience. So, when we say dilutive capital, when a business owner says dilutive capital, they are generally saying that some or a lot of ownership on what's called the capitalization table, which tells you and anybody involved with you in your business who owns what and how much, over what a certain amount of time, on what terms. So some of the most popular ones right now, of course, angel investment. They are typically going to give you an infusion of capital in return for a certain set amount of ownership of your company, and they typically get in very early in the game, often before you are really making profit or have customers, etc. So there's also venture capital, and that is the type of dilutive capital that we've heard a lot about in the news lately. We've heard about unicorns. We have watched or at least I have, watched the show Silicon Valley, which kind of covers the foibles of that world, and shares in some of the good parts, the very meaningful parts. So that is typically comprised of a venture group that is accountable to what's called LPs, or limited partners. And they are typically, again, these are generalities, there's different situations. They're typically going to come in at a slightly early to later stage than an angel investor. And they will typically give more money than an angel investor. Sometimes there's murky boundaries between the two. It just depends. Another thing we see a little bit of lately, of all things, is the traditional private equity. And I say traditional as opposed to VC because VC is a type of private equity. But there are funds popping up where traditional private equity is kind of wanting in on some of the earlier businesses as well. Sometimes we dilute for family and friends. Maybe we have a rich uncle and he wants to invest in our company. Typically, he's going to want some equity in exchange for that. So you're diluting for family and friends sometimes. Equity crowdfunding, I will, in full disclosure, I am biased against it because I'm in the B2B space. But sometimes for consumer products, that can be really effective. I have seen it leveraged effectively for B2B as well, but it's just not something that, in full disclosure, that I'm super interested in as a business owner for myself. Some accelerators, you got your Techstars and Y Combinator. Some of those types of entities will dilute you just a little bit, give you a small infusion of capital, and then you get a lot of mentorship and whatnot, connections to other investors. There's a lot of skin in the game for those accelerators. So that is one way to dilute as well. Non-dilutive capital means that you are not giving up ownership on your cap table. A lot of people call this bootstrapped. I call it bootstrapped usually just because that's my primary background. One way you can bootstrap is you just use your savings, and that is crazy and it's common. But most people who start a business are crazy. So that is one way to do that. You can also take out loans at the beginning or in various stages of your company. The better off you are when you actually take the loan out. Everybody says take the loan out when you don't need it. You can get good interest rates and repay the loans over the length of the loan at some amount of interest. The lower the better. There are grants, and what I mean by that, what I'm mostly going to refer to here, as they're very popular in Colorado, are SBIR grants. There's also OEDIT. For the state of Colorado, I believe that they spoke today at length, so I will speak more to SBIR just a little bit based on my experience, and then we have somebody else coming on later who will dive more deeply into that topic. So typically, the SBIR program, for instance, is a research and development program where you can progress throughout phases, the first of which is typically a phase 1, and you prove that you have a proof of concept, and you are paid to suss all of that out with no dilution. Some accelerators, we have Innovate Longmont right here in Longmont, Colorado. And the Tech Venture Accelerator in Boulder are two good accelerators that come to mind around here, where you are given access to mentorship and guidance as you start your company up, and they do not at this time take equity. Let's see, there's tax credits, which at first it doesn't seem like you might get an infusion of capital, but it can lower your tax liability. You can get research and development tax credits. You can get hub zone tax credits. Again, I'll gloss right over crowdfunding. I recommend, if that is something that piques your interest, that you Google. I say frequently, Google is your friend, and as long as you're vetting the sources that you're pulling up, that the sources seem credible, and you've run it by trusted colleagues, that the information on Google, at least as it pertains to business, in my experience, has been pretty good. There are competitions. Elon Musk's prize is going around. NASA runs a lot of prizes where you typically go in with either alone or with a group of folks from other companies, and you create something epic, and then you win a prize. So that is another way to get non-dilutive capital. So as we go into the benefits and drawbacks of each, I want to clarify again that just early and often that your mileage may vary. What is a benefit to my type of company may not be a benefit to your type of company. And what's a drawback to my type of company may not be a drawback to your type of company. I'm trying to get the gears turning in advance of the deeper dive that we will be going into at Startup Week here in just a little bit. So, dilutive benefits. Let's just, for the sake of simplicity, say that this is venture capital. Let's say you've gotten your prototype for whatever it is, you've got some letters of intent, maybe you got a SIBR award or some kind of grant, maybe your market, because you need to do market research before you even think about capital. Maybe your market research is saying there's just this hot opportunity, it's frothy, maybe investors are hitting you up on LinkedIn and at the events that you attend. So there's benefits there. The first obvious one is that you have money now to scale. Even though you may have given up some control of your company, you have somebody else on the board, more opinions, you have money. You can scale, you can grow, and conceivably you also get the support of an investor network. I have customers who are both bootstrapped and who have taken on dilutive capital, and the ones who have a good experience, it typically is just a great experience. They have awesome investors. That board seat that they take, it lends itself to even more wisdom in board meetings, more just availability of resources. So you have somebody who has skin in the game to make your company successful. You've probably already noticed as an entrepreneur that you get the companies that raise capital get good press. And when you get good press, you kind of get a reputation and you can staff up faster, and there's this perception of success, and you have all of these top talented people wanting to come work for your startup, and that is an awesome feeling, and these benefits cannot be understated. When it's done right, it's just amazing. With everything, though, there are benefits and drawbacks. Raising capital, and I wish that more startup founders understood this, that to do it right, to raise that dilutive capital the right way is a full-time job for the founder or CEO. Some of the other founders may be included in that, and sometimes it is not the right fit or the right time when you could be building up your internal capabilities and kicking ass on the development and traction of your product. And I see time and time again in the executives that I have advised over the years, in customer engagements, how time-consuming it is. And there is a reason for that. It's valid. I am not bashing the process, but I am saying, if you want to raise capital, please be prepared that to do it the right way, to find your heart investor, so to speak, to find that exact right fit for your company and your mission and your team, that it is intensive. It is intensive. The next point that I want to make is controversial, and it is not brought up enough. One of the things I love about Longmont and Longmont Startup Week is that we are a little bit more blunt in all of the right ways about some of the things that are wrong that we see around us. And we don't do that in a punitive way. We do that because we want to be movers and shakers, and we want to improve things for not just our company, but for companies around us. It's one of the most supportive ecosystems I have ever personally encountered. And so I'm saying that in this spirit, that investment can be extremely exclusionary for women and BIPOC. So I'll give you a little bit of Googleable information. Some of the statistics vary. You're smart, you started a company or you're about to start a company, you can vet this for yourself. In 2020, women received a little more than 2% of venture capital. That was down from 2019, where they received almost 3%. A little better, women receive about 19% of angel investment. Men who apply for startup funding had a 60% higher likelihood of being funded than women did in 2020. Even though studies Many studies, I'm sure there are ones that, say something different, but many studies show that women return over twice the investment that men do. Only 1% of VC goes to Black folks. Only 2% of VC goes to Latinx folks. Investors who might be in the audience, I'm going to use my platform for just a moment to speak directly to you, and then I'll go back to the presentation. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm not trying to have a political conversation, but this is a big problem. I cannot speak for people of color, but I can speak to being a woman. And if you listen to the experiences of women trying to raise capital, it can be discouraging. We need change. In the long run, you are only really hurting yourselves by leaving out entire demographics. There are trillions of potential returns on the table for you. Please invest in other demographics. These are the facts. They're not pretty, and they are real. So back to some of the dilutive drawbacks. Feasibly, you're giving up control of your company when you dilute. Usually 20% or so. It can vary, just like anything with any of this. 20% kind of goes for a seed round typically, or an early stage, what's called Series A. Some accelerators, like I mentioned before, might take around 6% in exchange for stipends or small amounts of capital. So this loss of control means that you do have more opinions to contend with. The investors, rightly so, get a board seat. They have infused your company with tons of money, and they get to provide their opinions because now they are vested, have vested interest in the trajectory of your company. So to that point, venture funds are incentivized by their very nature. Of course, there are some that are different. There are some who have changed kind of the way that it's done. But venture funds are typically incentivized to get you to grow fast, which is not the same as profit. They want the perception of a high value so that they can exit with as much money as possible. This can lead to skewed valuations compared to cash flow businesses based on funding rounds rather than hard numbers. That might be a drawback for some companies. That might not matter for some companies. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what it is. So when you dilute, there's generally, with most situations, going to be an exit requirement, which means at the end that you're either going to be bought out, and depending on liquidation preference terms, and I'll try not to get too much into the terminology. Again, you can Google common venture capital terms. I have found that to be pretty helpful over the years and in my conversations with folks across the spectrum, both diluted and non-diluted. So, again, you might be bought out depending on liquidation preference terms on the term sheet. Founders can end up getting fired at the exit. It happens. Sometimes they have to stay on the team. And again, depending on the type of term sheet they get, they can lose their IP and all money beyond a salary. And before I kind of go into some of the next point about the benefits of dilution, Stephanie, do we have any questions in the audience?
So far, the only question is about where to get a copy of these slides, but just to let everybody know, any presentations that are made available and all the recordings from today and this whole week's sessions are going to be made available on the Longmont Startup Week website. So stay tuned for that.
Excellent, thank you. And then just also at the end of the presentation, I'll have my email address up. Just message me, and I will send you a copy as well. Thanks, Stephanie. So, again, benefits and drawbacks to everything. Nothing is, in my opinion, super fixed. So, the benefits of non-dilution. So, feasibly, you have more control over your company. It means fewer opinions. As long as you're not bringing on a bunch of other co-founders, you can control who your co-founders are, who your business partners are, which means fewer shareholders. And if it could mean that you're more aligned and able to set what constitutes value to shareholders. This also means that you could have more control over your R&D budgets and the kind of the roadmap for those, because those are typically set in part by the investors when you do take investment. And that means it's easier to pivot. If you started out in a market that is kind of fizzling out a little bit, you can pivot your entire business model as long as the existing shareholders are all okay with it. And just what I've anecdotally noticed is that is easier to do when the original founders are all involved. The other thing that may not matter to some companies but may to others, just depending on kind of their backgrounds, is that you're getting real valuations. When you do your 409A to set up your, that's a valuation of your company that's real and tangible, and it when you're not diluted, it goes off of what's called your EBITDA, and that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So these are all tangible numbers. Valuations for dilutive funding can be more murky. Again, I'll try not to go into too much of the jargon. That's also a searchable, kind of a searchable situation. You're also technically getting a no exit rush if the other founders are okay with that. Just because of the nature of the business, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but typically when you dilute, you are signing up for a predetermined number of years until an exit or an IPO type situation is required. And so sometimes that doesn't work for some of the companies focused on sustainability or who have very mission critical organizations. For some companies that works great. It's perfect. It's a great fit. So again, this might not be a drawback for some companies. The last point, again, everything's just kind of subject to interpretation, but generally, a cash flow business, if they have a good leadership team and an even better product suite, can typically dilute later and raise funding when there's a real need to actually scale and the demand is really high and the market is just right. So again, very nuanced conversation, very nuanced situation. And I hope some of you guys are starting to get the gears turning. What is right for me? What is right for my company? Non-dilutive drawbacks. I need you guys to understand cash flow businesses are brutally hard. You are dealing with real numbers. You are dealing with real valuations. You are dealing with money in, money out, optimization of taxes. You are in contact with your accountant a whole lot. Debt will almost assuredly be a part of life at some point. And the main owners, typically it can vary from 10% ownership or 15 and above % ownership. Main owners will always be on the hook in some way. Your house may be leveraged as collateral, for instance, if you take out a loan. Your spouse might need to sign too. This kind of stuff can affect relationships. It can affect marriages. I didn't put this in the slides just because I forgot, but there's a gentleman named Scott Galloway who talks about the importance of your choice in a spouse being a vital part of your life as an entrepreneur, and I can attest to that. Everything feels very expensive, whether it's the cell phone bills or the Canva subscription or the rent or the utilities. Every line item stands out more. And I would say that this also can be a benefit because it makes owners, founders, more fiscally responsible and more careful. And that's something that I personally, on the principle of the thing, believe is good. But the stress that it causes is real. It can also be difficult to scale without big dilutive infusions of capital. I've seen in both customer relationships and in my own endeavors that hardware can be really hard to scale in multiple industries without large amounts of capital, for which most of us, unless we have a massive amount of savings accumulated, is impossible without big infusions of capital. And I also want to clarify, when I say scale, I don't mean growth. Growth means adding revenue at the same pace that you're adding resources, and scaling means adding revenue at a much greater rate than your cost. So for startups, that's a pretty big consideration. Additionally, lending options also depend upon economic forces a lot of the time. Interest rates, bank health, the amount of other companies needing loans, all of these affect you getting a loan. There is the saying that debt is cheaper than equity, though, and in most cases, I happen to agree with that. One thing I did also forget to add on the slideshow is that SBIR grants, of which we are recipients, and the like, can be very difficult to help you on cash flow projections. And if you have a talented team that needs a good salary, like mine does, Front Range, high salaries, boom, 6 figures every time. You're not going to be able to make profit on most of these types of phase one, especially the phase one projects are not going to get you much, if any, profit. They are a good vehicle for an R&D budget, though, and there's also a drawback to them is there's a lot of red tape. I always try to see every drawback in the kind of within the framework of a longer-term benefit. It helped us be a lot more organized and learn to work within a lot of different settings. I just want to clarify something. I've used very, very strong speech. I think that's good, given everything that we've been through over the past year and a half. I think it's good to be open, and I think it's good to be honest, but I think it's important to keep in mind that we need to be nuanced as well. Dilutive funding is not inherently bad. VCs are not bad inherently. There's good VCs, there's bad VCs. It's just different than non-dilutive. Investors also have a business to run. They must collect a return on their investment for their funds to stay alive. It's just a different way. Non-dilutive funding is not inherently bad. It's just hard in its own ways. So hopefully I've given you just a few things to start thinking about as you've gone through this week and you feel hopefully just as refreshed and revitalized as I do. Hopefully now you feel like you can start making some of these hard decisions. It's a process. You need to ask yourself a few questions. These are some of the questions that I asked myself. They're not the only questions, they're just a good starting place. How much control can I give up now? That doesn't even mean from a jerk standpoint, like I'm a controlling person. It's a multifaceted kind of question. How much can you give up? Are you in a situation where you need to keep your cap table open? How fast do I want to grow this? So if you want to have more of a sustainable type growth, there are not going to be, almost no investors are going to want to invest. And I say almost because there are some VC groups that are starting to see the benefit to maybe taking a more sustainable approach to growth. But they're typically requiring at least 10 times their return on investment over 5 years. Again, there's always different situations. But how fast do you want to grow this? Which leads into how fast can you reasonably go? What's your family situation? What are your people going through? What are your co-founders going through? Are they in a situation where they can roll up their sleeves and basically work sunrise to sunset to grow this as quickly as necessary to be considered a success? How much risk are you willing to take on? Each side of this coin tends to think that they take on the most risk. I see it more of, again, just two sides of the same coin. I think that in some ways there are bigger risks, some ways there are smaller risks to both. It's very nuanced. There's different risks for each type of funding. In my opinion, which is biased, you may come to a different conclusion. VC funding is less risky to the individual, even though it's potentially extremely humiliating for folks if they fail. You kind of get a reputation if you fail after taking capital. You can also lose all of your IP potentially to someone else. You can watch the company that you built proliferate without you. It can also go really well. It can go amazingly well. Look at all the unicorns. Look at all the famous cool people in Silicon Valley. In my opinion, bootstrapping, not diluting, is personally very risky, stressful, and hard. So I had to ask myself these same questions. And I think that you guys, nobody's surprised to hear that for now, I am not diluted. And I want to give you guys just a little bit of background as to why that is. Not that I owe anybody an explanation, and you don't either, except for your current shareholders and your people. We were not ready to give up control yet, mostly because of the pandemic. We actually monetized at the beginning of 2020 after a couple years of R&D. And in late January of 2020, people started talking about COVID. It wasn't real yet. Hadn't really proven to be in the States yet, but I just had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that trouble was coming. I have a highly technical team. I have a lot of experience with executive advising. We huddled and we decided we could keep this thing open on services and R&D. And that ended up being such a good idea for us. Am I perfect? No. No. Is my company perfect? No. But my people needed me. There were deaths of immediate family members, personal crises. People had to learn to work from home. We were forced as a hardware company to work from home. How the hell do you even do that? We did it because we did not raise capital. I would have had to go out, I guess virtually via Zoom, and work full-time running a campaign to raise capital. It's a full-time job. I was able to lead and love my team imperfectly. Do I have some regrets about how I handled it? Yeah. I was stressed too. And I would like to think that I could have been there for my people in that way, but I don't think I could have. I also watched some of my colleagues lose funding using COVID as an excuse. So, this is hard. Your mileage may vary, that's all right. Funding is a nuanced, complex, and ongoing consideration. Funding also isn't necessarily either or as it pertains to dilution. Many successful companies leverage both. Here are some resources that helped me decide. I'll leave those up on the screen for a second. It's almost time for questions. And again, this presentation will be made available. I'll just say my two very favorite, zebrasunite.coop and Venture Deals by Brad Feld. They both take an opposite kind of stance in some ways. Very good resources. Here's my contact info if you want to talk to me. I'm really invested in making sure that I do my part to help other entrepreneurs not give up, including you. Thank you. Stephanie, are there any questions?
We've got some great questions. Thank you
Okay.
so much, V. We really appreciate, I for one, really appreciated your unvarnished, frank description of raising funds and your experiences. So thank you very much. It's very refreshing to hear that kind of honesty. I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to briefly plug something that V mentioned earlier, which would be the Innovate Longmont Accelerator. We're currently accepting applications for that. You can go to innovatelongmont.org in order to apply, especially if you have an early stage smart manufacturing or technology startup. So that would be the right place for you. So I'm going to start with actually a question. This is my own question.
Okay.
I have a partner who also received an SBIR award, and it was a very difficult and trying time for everybody in my home. So I'm just wondering a little bit about your own personal experience with that. I think the SBIR comes off to a lot of people as a very almost like free money. I think that's the one source of quote unquote free money
right.
that's available to private companies. So I'm just wondering a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, I resonate with that. It was a very difficult situation. It was a very difficult process, and because we were awarded our phase one during the pandemic, there were many hiccups. There was a lot of red tape. You have to time keep very very stringently, and the government rightly believes that when they hand you that grant, you are a steward of government money. And so we really took that to heart as a public benefit corporation. And so it's not magical. It's not magical. I'm somebody who thrives on kind of hard stuff, and I appreciate the opportunity to get better from it. But it is hard. There is red tape. The proposal process is not magical. It's rigorous, and you must write a scientific paper that makes sense, that meets the objectives of whatever funding department in the SBIR program is in their solicitations. You have to be very careful how you craft that. You have to do it exactly how you say. Before you even get the award, you have to be set up in the SBA portal. You have to have a DUNS number. You have to have, it's a long process. So the free money is not free money. There's a trade-off, just like I mentioned before. So
thank you so much for that insight. One of our attendees wants to know what should they look for in an investor?
That's a good question. I will very briefly touch on that, and then I really think that the folks speaking after me will have even more in-depth kind of answers there. So it's always good to make sure that there's mission alignment. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Google is your best friend. Seasoned entrepreneurs are your best friend. There are typically, I think Innovate Longmont is a best friend, but I'm biased having come out of that program. Ask Google, ask the trusted people in your sphere of influence. You really need a mission alignment, and you need to also, and I won't go into this, but just write it as a tick mark if it's a question of yours. Ask them how far into their fund they are. That's a really big consideration for reasons we don't have time for today. And ask them what success means for them. Understand, too, that if they say maybe, they're almost assuredly saying no. So if you have an investor that's saying maybe, move on. They're going to tell you yes right away if they're interested.
Great. All right, so this, I think, is a really, really meaningful question, so I'm really, really looking forward to hearing your answer. But can you give recommendations for women and other underrepresented groups when applying for funding?
Yeah, it's hard. One of the reasons, in addition to the pandemic, that I have not in earnest, gone after this type of funding is because I know what I'm up against. You might get a lot of phone calls. Prepare for the rejection. One thing that can help, there are Facebook groups. If you type into the search bar, Women Entrepreneurs Support Network. There's a really good one, Startup for Women Founders. It'll be pretty obvious that it's not like one of the MLM heavy ones, but there are women of all races, sexual orientations, levels of expertise and experience. That's been a really good resource for me. I really like Zebra, the Zebra Co-op. Really like it. They really serve as a support system. I just haven't joined yet because I honestly have been so busy running my company, but that's on my to-do list. I'm very excited about their mission. If you go to their website mentioned on the previous slide, everything they said just resonated so much with me, and they really cater to women founders and founders of color. You can, again, Google, search BIPOC-friendly investors, women-friendly investors. That's what I have for that.
Well, I really appreciate your perspective on that. So this is a fun question. You are a bootstrapped company, very, very impressive for a hardware company. But can you give some other examples of successful bootstrapped companies?
Yeah, and I'll start right here in Colorado, SparkFun. We're customers. We're prolific customers of SparkFun. There, as far as I know, they at least started out bootstrapped. The very cool team, very cool facility. Patagonia, a favorite out here. If you don't have Patagonia fleece, I don't even have. Why do you live here? So that they bootstrapped. GoPro, GitHub, and MailChimp are just a few that come to mind.
Those are some big names. So
Yeah.
that's a good list. Thank you so much for sharing that. We also have another question. How much money should I try to raise?
Yes. So again, I think that the folks speaking after me might be able to give more detailed answers to this, but I always say to people I'm advising both as much as you can and as little as you can. And the reason why so you don't want to ever guess the amount of money that you want to raise. You want to raise an exact number. You need to have metrics to back it up, and you need to have a roadmap for the amount, and you need to communicate that early and often to your investors. So crunch the numbers obsessively. Do not ever guess. Do not ever try to guess high. You don't want an artificial investment or an artificial valuation. I've seen it time and time again, those artificially high valuations, meaning if you raise too much, you become valued too high. That can really, really hurt you later if it's not the exact right number.
Something you see on Shark Tank a lot.
Oh, really? I haven't watched.
Yes. It's okay. A big thing on that.
Is it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So on that topic, I'm actually curious. Let's say you are trying to approach coming up with some kind of a valuation, and maybe you're not so much of a money person. Mm-hmm. Is there someone or a kind of person that you might recommend founders could reach out to serve as almost like a mentor or to help guide them through that process, because it is so complicated?
Mm-hmm. I really like the fractional CFOs in the Front Range. I really do. There's a lot of talent out here. They know that there's a market. They're really dedicated. I have a fractional CFO right now. It's great. I really can't recommend it enough. And it works great for those folks because that's what they want to be doing in kind of when you don't need a full-time CFO. That comes, very, very soon after kind of the early stage, but it's really worked for our company.
And we have a little bit more time, but I was just wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about the role of a fractional CFO and like how that works in a business. Just it's something that's it's a newer and more niche concept. So
So it depends. It depends on like the goals of your company. Some fractional CFOs kind of serve as hyper accountants. Like if you're bootstrapped and you don't have any intention of raising, they try to maximize a lot of times on your R&D tax credits or making sure that you are preparing good runway. And then if you are somebody who's wanting to raise, a lot of times those types of folks either will work directly with a raise, or they will be part of a company of CFOs where they have another specialist CFO fractional CFO who focuses on the funding. So.
Thank you so much for that additional information. And thank you so much for not just speaking today, but V really makes herself very available to the community, to individuals, a tireless champion for women, especially in STEM. So I really appreciate that we were able to hear you speak today. Thank you so much for speaking. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. That's the end of this session, but stay tuned for our next session. It's going to be starting shortly. First, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors. I also want to make sure everyone knows what's coming up later this afternoon. The next panel is called The Entrepreneurial Dilemma to Give, Take, or Keep Equity. So very much on the same theme of what we just heard. I hope you all stick around for that. But if you're unable to stick around, or if you just want to keep the party going after hours, tonight from 4 p.m. until 7 p.m., we have our closing night trivia party at 300 Suns. So that's going to be really fun. I know how much everybody enjoys trivia. Just to go back to our sponsors for a moment, I just want to make sure to shout out our platinum sponsors, ARC Thrift Stores, Avocet Communications, Ward Electric Company, and the Longmont Economic Development Partnership, which I am from. If you do have any, actually, I meant to mention this earlier, but if you are interested in some of these tax credits, which are not, it's not a very fun name for them, but they are very powerful, very useful. If you want to know a little bit more about that, I'm actually the one who oversees that program. So I'm available, Stephanie@longmont.org. I'd be happy to talk you through how to get and take advantage of those tax credits. But thank you so much, everybody. Now we're going to be going to commercial, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.